There's certain aspects of React Server components that solve technical limitations we have today. But the way that I'm looking at React Server components now is that they're just APIs. They're just external resources that happen to return JSX and React elements instead of JSON. Approaching it from this perspective has opened up like a lot of new ways to think about RSCs for me personally, because most people are going to approach RSCs from Next.js's perspective, because they were the first ones to implement it. They've pioneered a lot of the ideas. But it says right there in the React documentation, and Next has said it themselves, that this is just their interpretation of RSCs. Remix is going to have their own interpretation, and I'm going to have mine. My interpretation is that React Server components should just be treated as yet another data source. And that means that all of our existing tool sets and kits and things that we use to build applications are going to need to understand those RSCs.
In this episode, Tanner Linsley, creator of TanStack, discusses TanStack Start, challenges with frameworks like Next.js and Remix, TanStack Router, RSCs, and how TanStack improves user experiences through better caching and invalidation strategies.
I'm Danny Thompson, Director of Technology at This.Labs, and I'm here with Tanner Linsley. Tanner, why don't you introduce yourself for people at home?
I'm Tanner Linsley. As of 6 months ago, I'm full-time on TanStack. I created all things TanStack. I've got a wonderful team behind me. But yeah, most recently I've just been working heads down on Router and Start, my new framework.
So to be honest with you, I've been following you for a while. I'm a big fan of your work. Heck, I used it in production environments. I used it in a couple jobs actually. I've given talks on it. I'm a big fan. Everything that you've ever done prior to TanStack Start has always been something on the side. You were always focused on another form of business. You were focused on your companies. TanStack Query, which has solved God knows how many problems for how many people, enterprise level all the way to indie dev. Why is now the time where you're like, okay, TanStack Start, I know this is going to be the thing, I need to go all in?
Well, for one, I've been in the SEO industry for 10 years, and that's a long time.
Yeah.
And it's a long time to be really anywhere. And I felt ready personally to jump into dev tools full time. I wake up in the morning and I think about dev tools. And I go to sleep at night thinking, how can I improve the developer experience for as many people as I can? So I really just wanted to live my dream a little bit more. And that's really why I chose now to go all in. But in terms of like the framework itself, last year I released TanStack Router, which I never had plans to like build a framework. In fact, I've been on record several times saying that I don't want to do that.
Right.
And that was because it would just take so much work. It would take so much time. And I was still doing my startup. I was still doing a lot of other things. But after I built TanStack Router and enough people came to me saying, this is amazing, this is wonderful, this has changed the way that we work, it's helped us ship more confidently, we just really think that you should consider building something full stack,
right.
Building a framework. And that's been going on since I launched Router, in fact, even before that. And I just kind of was like, yeah, I don't know if that's in the cards. But I found an opportunity to kind of dive in to DevTools full time. And I knew that when that moment came, I was going to focus all my time on Router and Start.
Devs, this one's for you. I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things you can do in 30 seconds or less on Studio. You can integrate, extend, and write custom scripts in a VS Code-based IDE. You can leverage zero setup dev, test, and production environments. You can ship faster with an AI code assistant. And you can work with Wix headless APIs on any tech stack. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself.
It's interesting because I've seen some of the dev tooling previews for TanStack Start, which I'll be honest, you're hitting it in an angle, not just from a usability perspective. Heck, the design of it looks so good. But my question now is, what made you even think to start trying to compete with all these other frameworks? It seems like there's so many frameworks out there already. There's frameworks already solving problems where people are kind of used to it. What made you even want to attempt to go against them instead of just trying to create another solution like TanStack Query?
I mean, I think the other frameworks won't like it when I say this, but using those frameworks is what made me want to build my own. I mean, I love them to death. Trust me. Next.js I have used for many years, and even Remix. TanStack.com was built with Remix from the get-go, and we used it for a really long time. These are wonderful tools that we've drawn a lot of inspiration from, that have, I think, really pushed web development forward. While I was still dinking around with React Query and things like that. But after using, these frameworks that are available out there, I still wanted more. I wanted more assurances out of my system that I was building with. And there are different reasons for each framework about, things that I love and things that I don't. And it got to the point with my old startup with Nozzle, where I was for the last 10 years, that I needed a router that was more sophisticated than anything else that was out there. I needed better assurances around type safety and search parameters. I needed new concepts like route context, and I just needed power user stuff out of my router. And unfortunately, Next.js and Remix and React Router couldn't fill that gap for me. And that's when I decided to build my own router. I needed the tool, so I was going to build it. After building TanStack Router, I built it for Nozzle. I mean, the use cases that I've always presented about were real problems and challenges that we were experiencing in Nozzle. Our URLs were just so long, so much state being managed in the URL. So, when I realized that this was a problem for me, I knew that it was going to be a problem for other enterprise applications and products as well.
All right, give me the skin and give me the idea. Let's say I'm a CTO of an organization. I'm already utilizing a lot of tools, and I'm starting to think about my architecture when it comes to RSCs or React Server components. What's your solution to this? Why do you think you have a better solution that would serve the needs of people in my position?
So React Server components are interesting. I have, some people would say I've waffled on React Server components a little bit. And I'm still not certain if they are going to be this really amazing thing that we embrace as a community. I hope so. I have really good hopes for them. There's certain aspects of React Server components that solve technical limitations we have today. But they're also could become a really big hammer for things that they don't need to be. But the way that I'm looking at React Server components now is that they are just APIs. They're just external resources that happen to return JSX and React elements instead of JSON. Approaching it from this perspective has opened up like a lot of new ways to think about RSCs for me personally, because most people are going to approach RSCs from Next.js's perspective, because they were the first ones to implement it. They've pioneered a lot of the ideas. But it says right there in the React documentation, and Next has said it themselves, that this is just their interpretation of RSCs. Remix is going to have their own interpretation, and I'm going to have mine. My interpretation is that React Server components should just be treated as yet another data source. And that means that all of our existing tool sets and kits and things that we use to build applications are going to need to understand those RSCs. So things like React Query. I want React Query to be able to understand an RSC payload. Same with my router. Same with anything that can do caching or interact with databases or anything like that. I think it's important that we look at RSCs as they are a data format and not this huge hammer that we can just solve every problem with.
Well, I guess digging in slightly deeper, why do you feel the need for React Query in order to utilize that as a data source? What solution are you thinking of that could be useful in that use case, especially considering, at least my interpretation of RSCs, a lot of it's supposed to be server-side, and then when it finally comes client-side, most of the work should be very limited or minimal in comparison to the way that we're approaching applications now.
Right. So React Server components, they're on the server because they're accessing data, asynchronous resources that can only happen on the server. And they're building all of these React elements on the server because it could be expensive to ship all of those components down to the client. Now, just because all of that's happening on the server doesn't mean that when it gets to the client, you're not going to have to do it again. So Next.js, they have built their entire routing tree and their entire application as one kind of big RSC payload. If anything changes in your application and you need to reprocess those RSCs on the server, you have to invalidate your entire tree, your entire application. And now that's just Next.js. Let's talk about Remix. If they keep going the way that they've kind of planned, where loaders can return JSX and become server components, you're going to run into the same challenge where you have fetched this server component, and who cares what it did? It brought back the stuff that you're going to render. But if something changes and you need to go back to the server to re-render that component, then you're back to Remix's or React Router version 7's invalidation strategy, which is just invalidate everything. So it's
hold on.
not
Are you
very
saying
different.
that you'd want? Oh, maybe I shouldn't even be talking. I should have let you finish. I'm sorry. But are you saying that one solution that you could think of here is instead of invalidating the entire tree, just invalidating that one portion that you don't need cached?
Correct.
Yeah, you that's a solution.
Well, server components, the entire idea is that they were built to be composed together. You can compose server components inside of other server components. And right now, the challenge is that all of the systems we have to manage server components, which is basically just Next.js, they're an all-in invalidation model. And Remix will maybe be a little bit better, especially if they can get their fine-grained invalidation in place. But the best case scenario, I believe what the gold standard for me for invalidation is React Query, where you can say, I have all of these queries in my system, and you have very fine-grained query keys that define the dependencies for these asynchronous resources. And all of those queries can invalidate and refresh and fetch independently of one another and share, request space. And there's no reason that a React server component payload couldn't be used in a use query. And that when the user leaves their page and comes back, that famous interaction from React Query when they come back to the page and everything updates, there's no reason that you wouldn't want your React server components that you fetch from the server to do the same exact thing as well.
Man, you kind of blew my mind a little bit. I don't think I thought from your perspective, but I also don't think, I even thought that was a possibility. I just thought it all has to be invalidated. I like that strategy. So I guess kind of tying a business purpose into this, what would be for a business individual that's trying to convince his team to start adopting this, what would that mean business-wise and utilizing that strategy of the cache invalidation?
I think that from a business perspective, should really be the user perspective. So as a business, you're worried about what your users think, about the experience your users are getting, right? And users are extremely fickle. They're very low attention span. They want things to always be up to date. And when they come back, when they interact with things, they just expect that what they see is a direct mirror of what is real. They don't know, users don't know about caching.
Right.
They don't know that it's it's possible for something on the server to be updated and changed, but what they're seeing on the screen is not that, right? All they really know is I told you to do this thing and you told me that it was updated, and I expect that to be consistent. And you need the best toolkit to make sure that your data is always up to date. This is going all the way back through just imperative fetching of data through Redux and managing stores and knowing when to refetch data, all the way up to why I built React Query in the first place. Well, so that you could say, this is my data source. These are the variables going into that data source. And without configuring anything else, you're going to have really good confidence that data on the screen showing to the user is always going to be up to date. It might be a little aggressive, but with server components, we're starting with Next.js as a role model of a system where it's very easy for server components to be out of date, right? If you're fetching dynamic data on the server and it comes back down to the client, they do something and come back, we need to make sure that what the users are seeing on the screen is always up to date as much as possible.
Before we started recording, you were kind of walking me through this example on loading and parallel loading. Can you kind of walk us through that again and your strategy for that?
Like for the router itself?
Yes.
I'll be honest, it's not very different from what Next.js and Remix are doing, but essentially you're taking the URL and in a deterministic way, you're matching that URL against all of the possible route branches throughout your routing tree that could render. And after that comes back out, you're going to have an array of routes that say, this is what we're going to render. And before you even start rendering, you now have the ability to pluck off the loading sequences, the components that they're going to import, a lot of different things, metadata things about these routes before you even start rendering them. Now, what you can do, and this is what both Next.js and Remix do as far as I understand, is once you have those, there's no reason that you don't just want to say, everything go start fetching all at the same time, right? Because why not? You want to get as much parallelism out of your stuff as you can. And I always constantly get questions from people that are like, well, what if one of my sub routes depends on data from a parent route? Then you can say, oh, well, they'll all kick off in parallel, but that child route is just going to be waiting around a little bit longer for something else to resolve. So I just think it's really important that you get that data flowing into your application as soon as possible. So yeah, we fetch in parallel. I think everybody should. What's interesting about that is technically, if you have a system that can resolve into multiple route matches, and each one of those route segments depends on their own server components, you could technically go and start rendering 3, 4, however many routes you matched, that many amount of server components in parallel, and coming back and then composing them together in a tree, a nested route tree. So,
as of the time of recording this, we have just seen TanStack. As of the time of recording this, we just saw that TanStack Start Alpha has been released.
Yeah.
How long do you think it's going to be before we're comfortable with the next stage? How happy are you feeling right now with some of the preliminary data that we're seeing in the alpha stage? What are your thoughts?
We've already gotten a lot of feedback in the alpha stage. So there's been feedback about wanting middleware for server functions. There's been feedback about validation for server functions. There's a lot of things surrounding server functions that right now they're just kind of the most basic version of what they could be. And they could definitely be much more. I've already designed, I've been working with Corbin Crutchley on designing this, what we believe to be kind of the maximum API that we would want to supply for server functions. And there will be a little bit of breaking change there from alpha into either another alpha or beta. But my plan is to have beta out really soon with those changes. And then absolutely try and get a stable version of TanStack Start out, hopefully by Thanksgiving is kind of my personal expectation. And that deadlines are always made up. You know, there's something could come in and we could say, you know what, that's just not going to work. React Router 7 could come out and say, we support React server components. And we're going to say, well, then we better ship our server component support too. And that could delay things. I'm trying to keep it in a way so that we can do incremental releases. I really don't like holding out long periods of time to try and do big releases and do big release cycles. I would rather just kind of ship incrementally. And when things become stable, we will 1.0, but we're going to keep shipping incrementally after that as well. My plan is to ship without server components first. And I would honestly love to see React Router 7 launch their server components before we do, so we can maybe learn from some of their mistakes or see what they did right, and have an easier path to victory. Because after all, TanStack is still just a private organization, right? We have a handful of contributors, all wonderful people, and then myself working full-time on it. We don't have VC money behind us or funding, and we didn't get purchased for millions of dollars. Like we don't have buckets of cash to throw at developers. So we're trying to stay hyper-focused on what needs to come next. And right now, as of right now recording this, its server functions need to be massively upgraded, and that's what we're working on.
If anyone can do it, it's going to be you, Tanner.
I hope so.
I'm a fan of your work, so I know it's going to come out well. Outside of that, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that how we want to end it? Do you want me to say something else after that? Oh, maybe call out to where they can find out more information about TanStack?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So taking the handshake back away, where can anyone find out more if they want to find out more about TanStack Start or anything that you're involved with?
So you can go to tanstack.com/start. It might say it's coming soon, but if you're sneaky, you can just click on the documentation link and try out the alpha right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but tanstack.com will get you basically anywhere you need to go. We have a private Discord that's, well, it's not really private. If you go to tanstack.com, click on the Discord link. Our Discord is very active, lots of really bright, fun people there. And we welcome people to come in and ask questions and, just give us challenges and report bugs. And we're a very active team. We release several times a day for all of our projects. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be a part of it.
I'm in that Discord, and I can tell you there were 3 times in particular where I thought I had a problem no one has had, and I searched and found the solution. So I lurk more than I'm active, but the solutions are there. It's a great resource.
Awesome.
All right, outside of that, Tanner Linsley, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.